Game on! Game on! Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 180 for July 31st, 2016. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us this week, everybody. I am very excited for this week's show because we are going to be diving into the world of Jason Bourne once again. On our latest extra film, we got the opportunity to discuss the original Bourne trilogy, of course.
Not Legacy. Not Legacy.
yeah, trilogy is the important
ones that
word
matter.
there. Yeah, exactly.
Which, as I said on that at the end of our extra film, I don't hate the Bourne Legacy, but it is so disconnected from everything else that we can't really acknowledge it much on this show.
I completely agree, but we did have a lot of fun talking about the Bourne identity and Bourne supremacy and the Bourne ultimatum, so definitely go and check that out. Of course, leading up to Jason Bourne that hit theaters this weekend, and once again starring Matt Damon. We'll definitely dive into that here shortly. And going off of that, since Jason Bourne was directed by Paul Greengrass, a veteran of the Bourne franchise, we decided for this week's top 3 to talk about our favorite Paul Greengrass scenes, which, looking back on his filmography and his shooting style, there's some great stuff to choose from. So I'll be very, very excited to dive into that here in a little bit as well.
Yeah, he has I think he has 7 major films, maybe 8 if you include his very first film with Helena Bonham Carter, which most people don't. This was hard. It really was difficult, and that says a lot for how great of a director he is.
I completely agree. He's a little bit underrated, I think. People don't really talk about him among the greats working today, but I really do like him as a director for sure. And to finish off this week's show, we are going to be continuing our French New Wave movie series with Hiroshima, Mon Amour. And since our guest didn't get a chance to watch it, it's just going to be Brennan and I devouring that movie as we continue our French New Wave movie series.
That word devouring kind of scares me, but it should be fun.
But speaking of our guest, joining us this week, once again, our good friend, Michael Denniston from the War Machine vs. Warhorse podcast. Mike, welcome back, good sir.
You know, it honestly scares me a little bit, too, that I come in right after you talk about devouring something. So I feel like maybe it was for the best I was unable to see this, because I think it could get weird at that point.
It could get weird. I think when you hear my thoughts, though, maybe devour was the wrong word, but it felt like fun to say in the moment.
Especially with a movie dealing with the aftermath of post-war Hiroshima, I feel like devouring is kind of that just seems kind of wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, but we are gonna. How about this? We'll discuss the movie.
We're just making fun of you.
Peel it back a little bit. At any rate, Mike, thanks for joining us. I know
Thank you for having me.
You're getting married soon. I'm sure you're a very busy guy planning for that. So thanks for making the time to be here this morning.
Yeah, I was excited to come on and talk Jason Bourne. I've been looking forward to this one for most of the year. So it's a good one to come talk about.
So let me ask you this before we get into the show. You're getting married in, a month or so? Now, knowing how you podcast and you like to plan and you do like 50 episodes in like 2 days sometimes.
Right, yes.
So after you get married, you go on your honeymoon. Is War Machine versus Warhorse going to continue with 6 episodes that week still? Or are you going to finally take a break?
The plan has been since about May to do about 5 episodes a month, one a week, and then maybe one other like bonus one, where we can find it. And I think I did pretty good in May, because I didn't realize how I was lazy, and I was like, I don't even know if I would brought out that point. But then there's some stuff comes up, and there's some opportunities to see some independent films, and so then I because I want to do that, I try to build episodes, but I'm trying to get a little bit out ahead. So no, unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, if you're not a fan of the show, there will be less of it coming in September.
I think there, Mike, that was JD's really nice way of saying, when are you just going to cancel your show? Because we talked about this when you and I were on First Time Watchers not terribly long ago, and at least Tim Costa came right out and asked you, when are you just going to stop?
Yeah, I like that I've developed a fan base of people that are most interested in the show's death. It's a
just
a
prolong
unique
it.
listenership.
Well, more I was getting at the fact that for a long time anyway, you guys would just put out tons and tons of content, which was great. And, to be fair, you have certainly kind of pulled the reins back a little bit. And like you said, in May, you guys only put out like 5 episodes, which was very different than, let's say, May a year ago. So,
right.
And with this big life event, I was just curious how things would be, because I just know how you like to plan and kind of be ahead of the game. So I didn't know if there was going to be 2 episodes that still come out even though you're gone on your honeymoon.
Yeah, I don't think I can blame the future wife on this, because I think I don't have a lot of hair left. I kind of like my hairline where it is, so I think I got to step back a little bit because podcasting can be stressful.
It can, yeah.
So those be less War Machine versus War Horse. That's our new tagline. So
fair enough. Well, it is a great show,
nice.
And I definitely recommend it. But on that note, guys, we have a really great lineup this week that I am very excited about. So without further ado, let's get into it.
And here we go.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 180. Brendan, I can see that you're looking for the InSession Film files.
Dude, your accent is terrible.
Bourne, my name is Heather Lee. I'm not in charge here. I wasn't here when you went missing. I can see you going through the old Treadstone files, retracing your history. I know you're looking for something. Let me help you find it.
Give me that phone.
Yes, sir.
Jason, this is Robert Dewey. Do you remember me?
Jason, your dad was a patriot.
He could see the threats that America was facing, and like you, he chose to serve his country
Out of a profound sense of duty.
He would not want to see you harm the agency.
You have to stop this. And you have to stop it now.
All right. Jason Bourne is directed by Paul Greengrass and, of course, stars Matt Damon, as well as Tommy Lee Jones, Alicia Vikander, Vincent Cassell, Julia Stiles, and a few other people here and there as well. If you're not familiar with Jason Bourne, God help you. I don't think I really need to set up a synopsis. I think we all know what we're getting into with this film. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We'll start with you, Mike. What did you think about Jason Bourne?
I guess disappointed would be the word for it, but it wasn't really as I was watching the movie. Like, I was into it the whole time, and
sure,
I thought it was entertaining, and it was, I think it was as soon as I got out of the theater or standing up, and like when I sort of looked at it as a whole, I was like, oh, that's the idea I had was that with Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass like coming back after such an extended break, and at the time for years supposedly like the ending of that character, that was like all they had to say artistically. I guess I just assumed like, oh, they've got some hook. They've got something new to add to it. And they attempt to throw in some of that like Edward Snowden kind of like, data leak kind of situation that we've seen in the last few years in real life. Yeah. And so it's trying to remain topical. And I thought they would do a little bit more with it, but that aspect of the film is truly a MacGuffin. Like once they introduce the idea that through no fault of his own, Bourne has come into contact with this material, there is obviously a great fear that it's going to be exposed and put out there, but it really becomes a more personal story for Bourne, which isn't bad, but I wasn't as interested in that particular growth because it really does feel like material that was never considered for the original trilogy. It doesn't feel like a natural extension of his story. It just feels like something new. And so, I'm a bit surprised that this feels more like, Bourne 3.5 than like the start of like a new trilogy or a new time period for it. As I said, I was entertained throughout. I didn't think it's certainly not like bad filmmaking, although you all have already hinted at one particular aspect of this film that is not up to snuff, which is a particular accent, which is kind of strange. And that did throw me off, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just very mixed on it that way, and I guess just ultimately disappointed because I thought that it was going to introduce us to sort of a separate, timeline for Bourne, like as an older guy, and obviously a changed world. It's like the original trilogy was very much post 9/11, War on Terror during the Bush years, and this one I thought was going to update us and make him seem relevant, but it's still mainly just about him and his sort of own hangups about being introduced to the agency. And I honestly thought we would be beyond that. So yeah, just kind of mixed initially.
Okay. What about you, Brendan?
Yeah, Mike, one of the first things I want to talk about is basically what you just started off with was regarding the return of both Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass to this franchise, which obviously got a lot of people excited. And for the right reasons, because as JD, as much as we loved all three of the Bourne trilogy, arguments could be made that Supremacy and Ultimatum are the two best movies of the franchise, and what Paul Greengrass did for those movies, not only amping up the energy and the aesthetics of it, but and how he was able to maintain sort of that topical nature that you're talking about, Mike. And you're absolutely right with those original three films being very much post 9/11. That essentially, I made the argument on Extra Film that those films, especially the Bourne Ultimatum more than anything else, were great movies about our paranoia and notions of national security. And I thought that did those very, very well. So now we've got this team essentially returning, and the movie is simply titled Jason Bourne, which kind of leads to the notion that this may be a more personal story. This may be more focused on Jason Bourne / David Webb himself, but I feel like it should have also led the way to something kind of new, maybe something topical and something relevant for our time, and it could have springboarded into something or something that could have followed afterwards, exactly like you're talking about, Mike. And like you, I was entertained by this film. It wasn't until after I left, like you said, where I realized that this film just did not have the resonance or the staying power that the other three films have. And one thing we talked about a lot, JD, in fact, you even wrote about it in your Anticipating Jason Bourne segment on our website, is one of the most arguable stars of the original trilogy was Tony Gilroy's writing, who was not back for this film, mostly due to personal reasons against each other between Paul and Matt themselves. I'm not sure of what the whole story was, but there was a lot of tension between them, and I know that they didn't want Tony Gilroy back for this, which is also the reason why he left and did his own thing with the Bourne Legacy, which is another discussion for another time. But his writing is very missed in this film. And the biggest problem here is very much what you're talking about, Mike, is you've got this personal story about Jason Bourne, which is interesting on paper, but in execution, I don't think fits or balances well with this other story that this film is trying to tell, its attempt to be topical with these notions of privacy, especially within the realms of social media. The problem is that is a very dated story, I feel like. In fact, There was a James Bond movie in the mid-90s, Tomorrow Never Dies, that 20 years ago that almost talked about this same thing, and that was 20 years ago. It's a very dated story, which really took away from the emotional gravitas, the staying power that I think this film could have had. And as a result, I think the film becomes more of a collection of good ideas rather than something that just feels very seamless. And these personal notions that become introduced about Jason Bourne, while they seem interesting on paper, I think it adds to the sort of convoluted nature of this entire movie. And it starts to tell, for me personally, a little bit too much that I felt very detached to this film. So like you, while I enjoy watching it, I just can't argue that the script is really the biggest problem here, and it leads to some character motivations in the third act that don't make any sense to me. It becomes very overstuffed, and it becomes more of a collection of good ideas than a seamless whole that I really argued. So it is a disappointment. Maybe more unfortunate would be the right word, because it's still a very well-directed film, and Matt Damon is still excellent in this role. But it is easily the worst of the Matt Damon Bourne films.
Well, it sounds like all three of us are completely in sync on this film. I guess I'll start off by echoing something that you were saying, Brendan, in the sense that I also didn't hate Legacy, but that film was very underwhelming for this franchise. So when they announced that Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass were coming back, I was very excited, despite Bourne's arc being wrapped up perfectly in that original trilogy, as we talked about on last week's extra film. And I gotta say, I loved the opening to this film. That John Powell, Jason Bourne cue, I loved that visual montage reflecting back on the series was fantastic. And it immediately supplanted me into this world. And since it's been about a decade since the Bourne Ultimatum, it's pretty impressive that it only took 2 seconds for me to invest right back in to this world and this character.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard and read a lot of criticisms about this film. The idea that, oh, why does this movie have to exist? It's just regurgitating the same material. It's not necessarily doing anything new with it. That seemed to be the consensus in a lot of the reviews that I read. And while I understand that criticism, I also think it's kind of absurd. I think the familiarity of this narrative is actually one of the smartest things about this movie.
I think it's kind of the point. Yeah, it's deliberate.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think thematically tackling this notion of history repeating itself is a brilliant move and so relevant to our culture today. Because if our country has taught us anything, it's that history repeats itself over and over and over again. And maybe that's unfortunate in how things have developed in our society. And 2016 is so reflective of that idea. And I think tackling that notion in the Jason Bourne world, the idea that another Treadstone will come along, but with modern technology and software and social media and everything that encompasses our lives today, is entirely believable. And I think the first 20 minutes wonderfully sets the foundation to explore that idea. The actions taken by the Nikki Parsons character, the symbolism of the rioting and civil unrest in that first action set piece, I think laid the groundwork beautifully. The problem is Paul Greengrass and Christopher Rouse's script fails to take full advantage of that premise. The script, as you were talking about, Brennan, becomes so consumed with its subplots that I certainly want to dive further into. And because of that, the larger narrative gets lost. But this idea of history repeating itself, especially from a government perspective, is a great idea on paper. But in execution, the screenplay fails to resonate that idea. And as a result, I couldn't agree with you more, Brendan. The absence of Tony Gilroy is very, very much felt here. There's a lot more I want to discuss with that, but overall, I'll just say and echo what you guys are saying, that I don't think this is a bad film. I was entertained throughout as well, but this is very much a missed opportunity that was very disappointing in the end. I think Matt Damon is great. He had no problem easing his way back into this character. There is a lot to like here and a lot to have fun with, but the script does fail the movie in the end.
JD, you said something about history repeating itself, which I do. I do agree. It's an interesting sort of way to tackle that, especially with Bourne kind of being a stand-in for our expectations of our country and what America should and should not do, like how active we should be in the world as far as stopping threats and when we overstep, because that's the biggest arc he has in this trilogy, is the feeling that he's been used for this greater good. But the more he finds out, the less he sees any real practical good that comes out of it. It's just an exchange of power from one source that is, I don't know if you would use the word evil, but is willing to cross lines, and if it's beneficial to our country. So he's just been used as a pawn. Here, I also agree with it being a missed opportunity, that I feel like it was going to be more interesting to see Bourne maybe reintroduce himself to the world and the what he can do as one man without the personal backdrop, because it instead makes him seem like a character that doesn't care about his legacy. He cares about this one event, which, as I said, was not introduced in the original trilogy. And I was a little bit surprised. I understood why that was there, to have some initial motivation for him, who is someone who's trying to forget and yet find out about his past. It's an interesting split in his character, that dichotomy. But I never got the sense that he, by the end of the film, wanted to be an active participant and tried to shape the world. And I really thought that's what they were going to do with this, this new film, and setting up a new standard for Bourne, a new viewpoint in the world. And so it is interesting to see history repeating itself, but I guess I didn't want it to be Jason Bourne, the character, repeating himself. I kind of falling back into its sins. But yeah, and I don't know if that's something that maybe they have an idea for, like, 2 more of these films or not, but it does feel very much like maybe like history is repeating itself, that this one really could be the Bourne Identity, which is not a film I have any problem with. There's a clear step up into the next 2. And if they make another one, I'm still optimistic that there could be that next step taken, second round of Bourne Identity, and then we'll get a Supremacy and an Ultimatum.
Yeah, Mike, you make a great point, though, that I do feel like that it was both Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass's intention to use this film as a springboard to make maybe 2 more movies, maybe have it be like its own sequel trilogy, if you will. I think part of the issue, though, is kind of like what you're talking about, JD, with the film's first 20 minutes, which I agree. I mean, that's almost like that's the short film of this film that I would recommend. And it really is good. And I think it sets the groundwork beautifully. Yeah. At times, though, I almost feel like this movie and the way it becomes overstuffed with its subplots, and you mentioned those subplots, and that's a great word to describe how it becomes so overly concerned with them. It almost, I feel like, tells its own trilogy's worth of material in this whole movie.
Sure.
And that is kind of where I think it just becomes a bit lost. And I think you also make a great point, Mike, about, the notions of history repeating itself being very valid, like JD was talking about, even though it does kind of feel like it almost conflicts maybe negatively with the Jason Bourne character, because I almost feel he's at a different place in his life. And I understand why they want to explore him personally and where he is, mentally in this stage, because we are essentially a decade later from Ultimatum, as we were talking about, JD. Although I do feel like it does sometimes become a bit detached with the character we grew up with, and I think that there needed to be a bit more, almost maybe more psychological explanation as to where he was, to find a sort of merriment to the motivations and decisions that he makes. And that kind of transitions into another one of my biggest problems with this film, are just some of the character motivations in this film make absolutely no sense. And one of them I want to get into, and I'm sure we'll all get into this because we are alluding heavily about a certain accent in this film, which is another conversation entirely. But Alicia Vikander's character of Heather Lee in this film, I'm not knocking her performance, because as we all know, Alicia Vikander is one of the best actresses working today, and arguably the best actress working of last year with the work that she had and the awards that she was recognized for. And her performance here isn't bad, but her character is so overwritten, I just had no idea what her motivations were. And she veers in so many different territories. I mean, I was expecting some kind of major twist involving something familial with her and Jason. Like, I was expecting the worst to happen with her, and it was so overwritten. It was so overwritten to the point of frustration. And I can almost say the same thing about Vincent Cassell's character of, we always have some fairly well-known but frightening actor that takes the role of the asset in these films. And Vincent Cassel is given the reins in Jason Bourne. And while, again, I wouldn't say his performance is bad, but I feel like they gave him way too much backstory. One of my favorite things about these assets in the other films is that there was a bit of an unknowing nature to them. And then when their character arcs completed, there was a bit of a revelation that almost added to the film dramatically and added to the dramatic urgency of it. Whereas Vincent Cassel's character is given so much backstory to the point that it actually just made the character itself less sympathetic for me. I cared less about him because we were just given too much for me. At least that's how I feel. And again, another pretty fascinating notion to explore on paper regarding those who were in the field after the Blackbriar program was exposed, and how that they were caught and potentially tortured because of that, and maybe that leads to a certain resentment to Jason Bourne and even Pamela Landy herself. Interesting notion to explore on paper, but just adds to the convoluted nature to this film for me personally.
Well, Brendan, you're getting to a lot of things that I certainly want to talk about as well.
You're welcome.
First, I want to get into what you were talking about as far as the motivations of this film as it relates to not only Vikander's character, but especially Jason Bourne. Because this movie had one major question it had to answer. Jason Bourne has been off the grid for almost a decade. Why does he come back? Why does he get involved once more? Early on in the film, the Nikki Parsons character hacks the CIA and uncovers some more files about Bourne's past and how that relates back to Treadstone. And there's a revelation that involves someone close to Bourne's previous life before Treadstone, I'll just say. Mm-hmm. And while that notion is a bit contrived, it does make for some compelling motivation that I can live with. However, the further this script peels back the layers of that exposition, the more tedious it becomes. And in essence, it's lazy writing. It completely shackles the film's momentum, and it felt like Greengrass and Rouse were trying to be clever. It's like, we got to be really clever about this movie, guys. We got to be smart. But instead, they just outwitted themselves to a point where their screenplay becomes overly artificial.
Yeah.
And I think the idea on paper is fine. It's enough to answer the question of why Bourne gets involved, especially because Paul Greengrass, he depicts several flashbacks visually setting up this idea. And while I would have wished to see more establishment between Bourne and this previous life before Treadstone, it works well enough. But each time Paul Greengrass goes back to those flashbacks, you can feel him foreshadowing this big twist. And when it happens, it's absolutely absurd.
It means nothing too. Yeah.
It means nothing. It's some of the worst writing I have literally seen all year long, and it's completely unnecessary. And it's disappointing because what you were just talking about, Brennan, as far as other assets in the field and how they would have been exposed when Bourne and Pamela Landy exposes Blackbriar and Treadstone at the end of the Bourne Ultimatum, it would have made those assets very vulnerable. Yeah. And I love that. I think that's a natural progression of what would have happened to these assets. And the fact that one of them would have wanted to go on this revenge quest, I think is great in the context of the larger narrative. I'm perfectly fine with them giving us more to the operatives in this film, because you're absolutely right, Brennan. In the previous trilogy, they're just kind of there. They're just out to kill Bourne. They're just a part of these programs, and they're just doing their job. And I'm perfectly fine with that. But I love the idea, especially on paper, that one of them experienced consequences because of Bourne's actions in the Bourne Ultimatum. So he has this revenge factor to him. That's fine. But then they go way too far with it. Like they do. They just stop. Just give us that motivation. That's
that was
enough.
really my biggest problem.
Absolutely.
Else, yeah.
So I completely agree with you. The fact that they felt like they had to be clever with the writing, it actually ended up stifling and hurting the film more than anything else.
Yeah, the whole, they could have titled this, The Bourne, This Time It's Personal, because that's, you have, as Brendan said, an asset who normally they are just the other guy on the end of the phone. Like, it's completely, what was terrifying about it in the first trilogy was the unknown, and they don't care. It's just a name, and it's just a picture of someone that they're going to go kill, and that's it. And even in Identity, that's sort of how that film, spoiler alert for that movie that's now almost 15 years old at this point.
I know.
That's how that's how they resolve it, is you think the guy is coming to finish Bourne, and then there's a power shift in the CIA. So having this one, it is interesting. And I thought, like with a lot of stuff, I guess we're just all really boring this episode. We're all in agreement. They introduced that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I would like to see the fallout, because we celebrate what Bourne does to try to put an end to that program, but there's obviously going to be consequences. And it's the same thing with, like, there's WikiLeaks is like a very divisive thing as far as, what should we know about what governments are doing, especially if they're like spying on their own citizens, but also who are we putting in danger if you just data dump everything without redacting any names that people who are out there fighting the good fight, and they've just become embroiled in this battle over information when they were trying to just do a very dangerous job. But yeah, once that is introduced, I never really got the feeling that he was any different from a guy who had no history with Bourne, as far as the actual execution of it.
Yeah,
so JD, you said earlier, a missed opportunity is a total film. There are little small missed opportunities that build up to that for the whole. And I agree. I was thoroughly entertained during it, and it is a film that, unfortunately, for podcasting purposes, the more you talk about it, the more negative you get, because there are just so many cool things that are introduced, and then I don't think there's any follow-through on them.
Well, and I think that just speaks to how much we enjoy the original trilogy, so when this doesn't live up, you are disappointed by it, and so it certainly does sound negative. And speaking of negatives, there's one more that I have to bring up before we get to final thoughts, and it goes back to what you were talking about, Brennan, as far as Jason Bourne's motivation and his actions in this movie. And I just have a simple question to kind of set up my thoughts here. What is Bourne doing in the third act of this movie? What is he doing? Because during the film's climax, he confronts the main antagonist of this movie, which is another CIA official, as you were talking about, Mike, just another power shift. But why is he at this hotel at the end? Again, the film has to answer, why does Bourne get involved? Well, they certainly do that with those flashback sequences that I was revealing earlier. And I think the reveal of that is fine. So how does that motivate Bourne to take the actions that he takes in the film's climax? There's this final meeting that goes down, and I think it horribly fails to connect the dots. And I think as a result, Paul Greengrass accidentally contradicts everything we know about the Bourne character. And here's what I mean about that specifically. In the Bourne Supremacy, Bourne's journey is interrupted by the Ward Abbott character. And in the process of trying to get the CIA off his back, he confronts Abbott, but he's not out to kill him. He is out to expose Abbott, and he succeeds by tricking Abbott into confessing on these audio tapes. In the Bourne ultimatum, Bourne steals files from Noah Vosen. He then gives them to Pamela Landy, who exposes Vosen and other CIA higher-ups. Bourne is not out to kill, though. He's looking at the bigger picture, and he uses his skills to expose the CIA's dirty laundry, if you will. But in this movie, when he is confronting this CIA official, Bourne isn't really trying to expose him. He's forcefully looking for answers and perhaps out to kill him. And if he's not, what is he doing? Because he's clearly not out to expose this guy. It makes no sense, and it contrasts everything we've seen about the Bourne character before. And there's not enough setup to justify why he would all of a sudden be morally conflicted. And I think that's the biggest flaw of this movie. We get an understanding of why Bourne wants answers as it relates to, previous information he found out about his past. But what really motivates his actions in the end? What is he doing at that hotel? The movie fails to give us clarity in that, and as a result, it's ambiguous in all the wrong ways.
That's what really makes the MacGuffin here problematic, that he has these files that, we have a central character that has, is risking everything to get basically into his hands, knowing that he's capable of getting it out there to the world. And just as you said, JD, in the original films, that was his goal. The only way to truly, he believed, stop it was to expose them. And this time he has the ability to immediately get that out there or to get it safe. And instead he is blinded by this one particular personal incident, which I'm not saying clearly it would be shattering to a young man. But I thought like, wow, that's like kind of a, like, has Bourne with age gotten worse as far as his, like his protocol there? Like he's got everything to end this particular power structure. And he's blinded. And then you're right, he kind of turns into a common thug basically.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
and I think a lot of that too, and then we'll get to final thoughts, JD, is part of the reason he's there involves the Alicia Vikander character in some way, involves her drive to help get him there. I'll say it as that just for the sake of not getting too detailed and maybe potentially veering into spoilers. But a lot of that also has to do with the motivations of her character, which for me make like negative sense.
The twist with their character comes out of nowhere. Completely.
It comes out of nowhere, and then when we get to the actual climax of this film, and then goes to another direction, like where the hell did that come from? And and I think she's really the biggest problem for me more than anything else. But her unclear motivations and the arc that her character goes on is also key in showing the flaws in Jason Bourne's writing itself, as well as you're talking about. And I think that she's an important reason for why it also just does not work at all. And it's a shame. It really does boil down to Paul Greengrass and Christopher Rouse's script. And last thing I'll say, Christopher Rouse, you're an editor. You've edited these films. You have no business writing these films, and this is evidence of that. So if we do get another film here, either Paul Greengrass, write it yourself, or fix your bond with Tony Gilroy and bring him back, or maybe get one of the other Gilroys who also can write. I mean, just something like that.
And it's ironic because Rouse did edit this film as well, so he was double dipping in terms of duties. And Paul Greengrass, in my opinion anyway, has proven himself as a writer. So I think he could have tackled it alone and it would have been fine. So
I agree.
Anyway, let's go ahead and jump to final thoughts. We'll start with you, Mike. So any other final thoughts, and what grade would you give Jason Bourne?
Well, my final thought is a new one, just touching off what you all just said. You know, we brought up the fact that War Machine versus Warhorse is going to trim back as far as what I'm putting out there. So Bourne franchise needs a writer. You know, I'll work for about $15 an hour. I'd just be happy to be there. I can fix this real quick. I have nothing but time, really. So,
all righty then.
Yeah, I think it's something as far as the final grade where it's like, you know, I hate to give. I guess I would give it like a C. Like as far as I felt like it was overall sort of an average experience, and that's I mean, a C has, at least when you were in school, a negative connotation. But if you're just going for like a true like middle grade, I think it's right there in that zone. So it's got, you know, it's got a lot of good, it's got a lot of bad. It's just kind of right there in the middle. And unfortunately for the purposes of discussing film, sometimes those reviews I think come off more negative, because you can have a whole lot more fun with a D or an F film, and something that you're looking forward to that just ends up kind of average experience to come off very negative. But I mean, I did enjoy my time while I was there, but I don't think it would be something that I would revisit, really. I would revisit the trilogy, but I don't know if I'd get around to this one.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. What about you, Brendan?
Yeah, last thing I'll say, and this kind of goes into something you said, JD. I think it was quite a few days ago. We may have been talking about it offline, but though I think it almost feels as though people's expectations for this film almost kind of mirror our expectations when it comes to Pixar films.
Yeah,
and you look at how even when a Pixar film comes out that's just good, but not great and not a masterpiece like some of the other films that they used to do, it's almost seen as a disappointment. And that was kind of one of my things going into this film, knowing how the reviews have been a bit lukewarm and some of the reaction has been kind of mixed, to say the least. And I was kind of thinking that maybe people just had their expectations too high. And walking out of the film, not only do I agree and see the problems with this film, but with at least Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass coming back. And then you have other actors like Tommy Lee Jones and Alicia Vikander. And then you have Julia Stiles returning as Nikki Parsons as well. This should have been so much better. It really should have been. And I hate to sound critical in that regard, but it really didn't need to be. It really should not have been the product that we got. And knowing that Paul Greengrass and Matt Damon only wanted to come back if they had the proper story to tell, it becomes very ironic that they're coming back for a story that they essentially told before. The essence of this story has been done before. And even though I'd never criticize a film for what it's about, it's always how it's about. We've beat to death that the how it's about here really is a mess. And the script is just not good. And the last thing I'll say about the script, as I already reiterated, is that it really is just a collection of good ideas. And I think each of those good ideas potentially could have made a great film on their own. It's almost like they just didn't have enough faith in either one of them to expand into its own story. And that was really its biggest problem. So I really do hope that they make another film here and that Paul Greengrass and Matt Damon do come back, because I do think there is enough merit introduced in this film to continue on in some way. I just hope it is done consistently, and I hope it feels a lot more streamlined, and that is what I think this film is sorely missing. And I would still welcome a return, because I do think there is still enough to tell, and I think there is enough to be done right. So, but this film on its own, I will agree with you, Mike. It's not a bad film at all, but within this Bourne franchise, I think we did deserve better, and to give this film like a C+, I think is what I would give it. I was tossing between like a C+ to a B-, but I think I'll reserve to a C+, because there are just way too many objective flaws that I can't look past. But even so, to give it that low of a grade is still very disappointing. And in the long run, that's a sad thought. It really is, because I still love this franchise, but this is definitely the weakest of the Matt Damon films.
Well, I guess for final thoughts for me, I kind of want to start off by talking about something we discussed on the Extra Film, Brendan, because I went into those three films heavily talking about all of the convolution of those movies and how in the end, none of it really matters, because everything pointed back to Jason Bourne and his progression and his arc. And I felt like Tony Gilroy did a fantastic job at making sure that you knew that it was Bourne's arc, and it felt fluid and seamless, and I love those films because of it. Yeah. And in this movie, you know, you're talking about the odd turn with the Heather character, and I completely agree with you, Brendan. I could have lived with that, and I could have lived with the contrivances of these flashback sequences we see earlier in the film if Bourne's story came together for me in this movie. If Paul Greengrass did what Tony Gilroy did and pointed everything back to Bourne, and his story in this movie felt fluid and seamless, I could have lived with those issues. Sure. But it doesn't. Bourne's motivations in the third act of this movie just make no sense to me. And while I love Matt Damon, I think he's great in the role, and I engage with his performance all the way throughout this movie, the writing of his character was very, very lacking in this movie. And that was just the most disappointing thing for me, because all these other issues that we're talking about, I could have lived with. You know, I lived with whatever issues the original trilogy had because it was about Bourne. And in this movie, it's just not. It's more about these subplots. And I think as a result, that's why this film is so disappointing for me. Speaking of the Heather character, we kind of brought up Alicia Vikander earlier, at least you did, Brendan, and her accent, I tweeted this out. It's so distracting in this movie. It is so bad. I loved her physical performance. I think she gives some facial expressions that are just jarring, and I loved her physical performance, but that accent certainly was really bad. Thematically, this idea of surveillance and freedom is very much on the nose in this movie. There's a social media giant subplot that perhaps was a good idea on paper, but I think in execution is rather forced. When it comes to Paul Greengrass's direction, the action scenes, I think, are what you would come to expect in this franchise. I think they're fine. In fact, I really liked that car chase at the end of the movie. Was pretty exciting.
Was good, yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. The shaky cam, however, is problematic. Not in the action scenes. I expect that from Paul Greengrass. But the camera never stops shaking in this movie, ever. Even when the characters are still. Greengrass feels the need to make sure that you can't read anything on the goddamn screen, even though he's putting text on the goddamn screen. It's just absurd, and he goes overboard with it. Despite my criticisms, and I've laid out a lot of them here, I think this movie is enjoyable. There is a good movie here somewhere in this mess. I feel like there is one. But the presumptuous script certainly restrains the film thematically, and it fails to take advantage of these great ideas that we've been bringing up. So it is very disappointing in the end. I will say that ending scene, loved it. The bookends of this movie, as far as giving us what we would expect from this franchise, those are great. Everything in the middle somehow they missed the mark on that, though. But I'm with you, Brennan. I would give this a C+. As much as I want to give it a B- or a B, I can't go that far. So I give it a C+. If you want to read more of our thoughts, you can check out our written review that we'll have soon on our website at InSessionFilm.com.
And if you agree or disagree with our takes on Jason Bourne, leave us a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/InSessionFilm or tweet us at InSessionFilm. You can also leave us a comment on our Google Plus page or email us directly at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. The last thing I'll say, JD, is to those that do want to see this film, avoid the TV spots, because one of the TV spots has a major spoiler in it. And I saw that before I went into the movie. So one of the major events of this film, I knew it was coming going in, and I was astounded that they gave that away. So I'll tell you guys what it is offline, but I cannot believe that was exposed.
Well, knowing marketing today doesn't surprise me. That's why I avoid TV trailers at all costs, especially. So anyway, on that note, great review, guys. That was a fun discussion. But moving on to our top 3, we are going to be talking about our top 3 Paul Greengrass scenes.
Execute.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. The InSession Film Top 3 is brought to you by our good friends over at the First Time Watchers Podcast. And Brendan, we of course just got done talking about Matt Damon's new film, Jason Bourne. I gotta say, just like that movie, the First Time Watchers Podcast, sometimes they don't make any sense, but in the end, you still have fun with them anyway.
I was gonna say, if you don't listen to them, they'll punch you or beat you to a pulp in some way. So they'll Jason Bourne your ass is what they'll do.
Yeah, exactly.
Not literally, of course. They're lovable and a great supporter of our show and a podcast you guys definitely have to check out. Hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano, and they certainly know their movies.
Absolutely. And because of that, their banter is amazing. It's very entertaining. Sometimes divisive. Sometimes they fight each other, and you have to kind of restrain them back a little bit. But in the end, it's worth every second of your time.
Absolutely. And what's unique about them is that every week they'll pick out a movie that they've never seen before, watch it and discuss it to give a real fresh perspective on that film. They'll also discuss other movies and other trailers that they've seen recently as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they give out some great movie recommendations at the end of their show that I would pay attention to. And overall, it's very smart. It's a fluid show. It's very easy to listen to. And despite our jokes about them, it's definitely one you need to check out. They're a lot of fun. So, Brendan, where can you find them on the internet?
Just find your Black Ops folder somewhere. You'll see Treadstone, Blackbriar, Iron Hand, and then you'll see First Time Watchers. they are Black Ops when it comes to the film podcasting world. No, totally kidding. You can find them at firsttimewatchers.blogspot.com. Hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers and on Facebook by simply searching for First Time Watchers.
And go subscribe to them on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave them a review with hashtag Black Ops Podcasting. They'll know then that we sent you to them, and they'll appreciate that. So the show is worth the time. Go check it out. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
On the Simplistic Reviews podcast, we talk movies. We talk TV. We talk.
Hello, Julie, what the heck are you doing?
Trying to make our spots sound more exciting by adding explosions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could have got the point across with sound effects, not the real thing.
Car.
Download the show on iTunes or at simplisticreviews.blogspot.com.
I'm sure your insurance company will cover that.
No, they won't.
No, they probably won't.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 180, and now just finishing our discussion of Jason Bourne, which was obviously directed by the great Paul Greengrass. We thought this was a perfect opportunity to dedicate our top 3 to him personally, because, JD, we talked about this at the beginning. You know, he's kind of, I wouldn't say he's an underrated director. He's definitely a well-rated director, but he's one that you and I do appreciate very well. And we haven't really talked about him much on this show yet, so it makes a lot of sense. Let's devote a lot of time to the greatness that he has brought to a lot of his films. So we'll be talking about our top 3 favorite Paul Greengrass movie scenes. I will toss it to you first, Mike. First, did you have any criteria that you used to pick your list? And also, what is your number 3 Paul Greengrass scene?
Well, I texted JD back earlier when he told me what the list was going to be this week, and in a true smart-ass fashion, I said my 3 scenes would be Jason Bourne punching someone.
Yeah.
All right, well, then you're done. I guess that means only JD and I have to do our real throws.
And so I didn't go too far beyond that, but I did want to do, thinking about Jason Bourne and rewatching the films, getting excited for this new one. I did want to kind of celebrate that. So I did try to go a little bit further than him just punching someone, although that is great. But my first one is something that I think at this point probably could be considered, it would be kind of parody if they went back to it, is the magazine fight, I guess, in the Supremacy, which already at that point, we'd seen him fight with a pen in Bourne Identity. But I always found that impressive because that's something that in execution could be like too comical. It's slightly comical that this dude can fight with a magazine. But I was really impressed that Greengrass didn't turn it into a running gag where it was like, let's see what object Jason Bourne can pick up and beat your ass with. And so that's one that I think that they probably can't go back to the well on. Like, I don't know if like Jason Bourne has kids, in the 17th version of this, I don't think he's going to be picking up like Legos or Tinker Toys and like beating. Maybe he will. I don't know. But yeah, definitely the magazine fight. I think it's like iconic moment of the series. So yeah, that would be my first pick.
It's interesting, too, because you mentioned how it could have easily become a running gag in this franchise. And if you really think about it, it kind of does, but it never becomes a gag. Because in every one of these 4 films with Jason Bourne in it, as Matt Damon is Jason Bourne, in every hand-to-hand fight scene, he picks up something that should not be used as a weapon. Yeah. In Bourne Ultimatum, it's a book, and it's like, and it was a pen in Identity, as you're saying. Yeah. And there is even a moment in Jason Bourne where he does the same thing. I think he uses like some kind of like destroyed pot or something. I don't know. Anyway. The guy is very creative, and I think that's actually a good pick though, because it does help emulate the character of Jason Bourne, which is something that Paul Greengrass has done very well in the films that he has directed of the Bourne franchise. So that's a good pick in that regard too. How about you, JD? What criteria did you have, and what is your number 3?
Yeah, for my criteria, I kept it pretty simple. Pretty much any feature-length film directed by Paul Greengrass was eligible, and I just wanted to pick moments and scenes that really stand out to me viscerally in some sort of way. So it was pretty simple in that manner. For my number 3, I'm going to his 2006 film, I believe it was, maybe 2007, but it is United 93. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to digest with this movie. I really, really dig the film overall. But the scene that I want to go to is, I don't feel like it's one that a lot of people would go to, but it's one that kind of took my breath away, especially when you're looking at this film through the lens of today and looking back at 2001. And it's the moment where the second plane hits the World Trade Center. And what I love about this moment is that Paul Greengrass does a great job of depicting controlled chaos in this movie, where we see the government and how everyone involved behind the scenes as far as air traffic control and all that, they're obviously scrambling because one plane has already hit the World Trade Center. There are reports of other planes being taken hostage. And so people are running around crazy. And then there are reports that there's a second plane losing altitude. It's heading toward New York City. It's perhaps hijacked. And there's a shot from one of the control towers where you see a plane descending and heading toward New York City. And then Paul Greengrass cuts to TV footage where you actually see the plane hit the World Trade Center. And when it happens, it becomes eerily quiet. No score. No characters talking. You can hear a pin drop. It is so quiet. In fact, the whole film, every character just takes a big gasp. Like everyone is in disbelief in what they had just witnessed. And even as the audience, I felt that as well. Even though I know it's coming and I know what's going to happen, it just literally took my breath away, as it does with the characters in the movie. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. And I think just depicting that so viscerally in this movie, it just gives the movie such a heft to it that I think is so wonderful at building the emotional stakes of this movie, and also depicting the chaos of that whole day. And it's such a, I don't know. I want to be careful because I don't want to say it's a good moment. It's not a good moment, but
it's a well done moment.
In terms of filmmaking, it's really well done, and I think because of that, it really stands out to me. So it's my number 3.
Yeah, when it comes to United 93, I mean, there's a reason why Paul Greengrass was nominated for Best Director for this film, and it's in those small moments like that, because these are things we are all familiar with, but at the same time, these are things we don't want to be familiar with anymore, and there's an interesting dichotomy there.
Sure.
The thing is, though, is what makes these moments so resonant is how authentic they are and how simple he treats it, and how he treats it from the perspective of outsiders. He doesn't rely strictly on news footage and the physical commentary that we were told as we witnessed it, but he relies on those who were in the field trying to stop it from happening. And those moments of pause that you're talking about are incredibly powerful because of just how authentic this movie presents its subject material. He even goes as far, he being Paul Greengrass, goes as far as to cast some of the real people who were on the ground that day, such as Ben Sliney, I believe his name was. Like, these are people who were really there. So it almost adds a bit of a documentary style to this film in the midst of this drama. And man, does it add to the authenticity of this film. But those small moments, I absolutely agree with you on. Yeah, and I may have more to say about this film as we go on, so I'll just stop there. But I do agree with you about this film. It's quite breathtaking. As far as my criteria, I am with you, JD. It's really just any film that was directed by Paul Greengrass is eligible, but I did try and focus a bit more on his different styles and aesthetics to try and get a bit of a, almost like a quote-unquote smorgasbord of what the different things that he brings to his films, to just kind of talk about everything that he is able to do. So I wanted to focus on that as well. And kicking off of that, going into my number 3, I alluded to it as we kind of set up the transition into this, but I can sum up my number 3 pick in one word: execute. And that is obviously that is basically the climax from the movie Captain Phillips. The reason why I'm picking this one is something that Paul Greengrass does very well in all of his films is the way that he uses sometimes subtlety and sometimes a quiet nature to build tension. And that is what he does in a very brief moment by letting the music just cut out, by letting no one speak, and out of nowhere you hear the words execute, and that is when the Somali pirates are taken down and Captain Phillips himself has been saved. So I mean, this is a true story. It's not a spoiler to say it if you haven't seen the film. But the pause there and the way that he is able to build tension is one of the best moments of tension building I have seen in a film of that decade, I think. I mean, it may not be one of my favorite films of the decade. I love the film, don't get me wrong, but that moment is immaculate. It is absolutely immaculate. And then Tom Hanks's performance over top of that just seals the deal. And again, it kind of creates a good balance there, looking at Tom Hanks's performance in what Paul Greengrass does very well in a lot of his other politically charged films, and that's to remain open-minded about the situation, because you can argue what Richard Phillips did in putting his crew in danger by trying to take the quote-unquote shortcut route. What he did was maybe not that honorable, and there's a moment in the end where I feel like that ambiguity, and that moral ambiguity specifically, is still kind of retained in the film, which I do appreciate, even though you still feel a lot of pity and you feel bad for this character. And I think Paul Greengrass is very good at doing that as well. But that moment of tension is incredible. Love that moment, and I think it's a great moment of why Paul Greengrass is so good at building tension. That's why it's my number 3.
I loved that moment so much that back in 2013, we did an entire bonus content episode talking about that moment. And just how incredible it is, not just from a filmmaking standpoint, but from a militaristic standpoint, just how badass it is and how difficult it would have been. That would have been just almost impossible to pull off. And they do it so well. And I completely agree the way that Paul Greengrass depicts it, similar to what I was talking about with United 93. You literally are breathless in that moment, waiting for this action to take place. I'll just go ahead and spoil this now. I have a different moment from Captain Phillips in my top 3, so I left this as an honorable mention, but man, it was close. In fact, if I had a number 4, it probably would be number 4. I love that scene as well.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised to hear that. I'm very excited to hear what your Captain Phillips pick is. So with that, let's continue going on. So going back to you, Mike, what is your number 2 pick for Paul Greengrass scenes?
Well, it's not from Captain Phillips because it doesn't involve Jason Bourne punching someone.
I knew you were going to start off with that. There's just no denying it.
But actually, the sequence from, another Bourne film doesn't involve punching. It's the Waterloo train sequence where he's trying to contact the journalists, and they're trying to hook up.
Tie your shoe right now. Tie your shoe. Wait. I'm going to walk by you. I want you to move along the far wall to your left. In 4, 3, 2, 1, stand up. That's it.
This guy. Where the hell is he? You cannot afford to lose this guy, people.
All right, that line you're on is good. Stay on that line. Stay on that line.
Oh, the bit man. I think he's one of them.
Garbage man? Negative.
Oh, Jesus, he's reaching for something. Oh, God, he's got a gun. He's got a gun.
Stay on the line you're
on. He's got a gun.
Do not deviate.
What I love about it is, Greengrass catches a lot of flack for his style, because it is, you can tell when it's one of his films, you can tell who directed it, and it's very much he's kind of got that auteur thing going on with the shaky cam, with that almost journalistic sort of background, the way he covers events, even if they are fantastical or extreme situations, even something like Captain Phillips or United 93, which are true. He does somehow ground them with that sort of you are there approach to it.
Yeah.
And I like that blend with this like sort of classical filmmaking where it's almost Hitchcockian as far as like the 39 steps, where you do have this extended chase where you have all these outside forces. And what's really impressive is I think a lot of filmmakers have a problem blending that with technology, which is what the Bourne series, and in particular this sequence, has always done well as far as the ability to communicate with one another. And it really is a great display of this like disconnect between people who are trying basically to form some sort of bond with all these outside forces keeping them apart. And it's also just really fun. Like it's something from last year. The Mission Impossible opera sequence I loved. And I love any of those type of like scenes and thrillers where it's like they really give you enough time to fear for what the characters are about to do. And there's just this great buildup. So I love the Waterloo train sequence. That would be my number 2. And number 1, we'll see if Bourne shows up and punches Captain Phillips. I don't know, maybe.
You're gonna make up a moment. I see how it is.
Yeah.
Although I will say, if that actually did happen, and we were watching Captain Phillips, and all of a sudden Jason Bourne just showed up and punched him, it'd probably be my favorite moment. So I'll give you the benefit of
execute, and then Jason Bourne just appears on the
He's
scene.
the one that executes.
And then you just hear Moby's Extreme Ways show up out of nowhere. Oh, that would be a fist in the air moment and totally not historically accurate, but who cares? But anyway, regarding the Waterloo train sequence, though, I have to agree with you. And I think this scene is the reason why that Christopher Rouse won the Oscar for Best Editing that year. It is so well put together and so well building tension, but also, like you said, kind of a throwback in its execution as well, because you're absolutely right that it's almost kind of Hitchcockian, very much like how that opera sequence in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation was kind of mirroring Hitchcock as well. I believe it was The Man Who Knew Too Much. I believe it was kind of ripping on specifically, yeah. But at the same time, it does a good job making it its own and feeling of its own piece, and not like it was wearing its influences so heavily on its sleeve that it became distracting, which I think Paul Greengrass does exceptionally well in that Waterloo train sequence in Bourne Ultimatum. And again, also kudos to Christopher Rouse and his editing there for maintaining such a deliberate pace to it that just never ends, and it creates so much great tension as well. Another great honorable mention for me, so this is a very good pick. How about you, JD? What is your number 2?
I'll just say quickly that I love that moment as well, Mike. I only got a chance to briefly mention it in our extra film, which is unfortunate because I would have loved to have gone into it further, but I just echo everything you just said, Brennan. I absolutely love and adore that sequence. For my number 2, I'll keep this pretty brief as well since we went into it on extra film, but it is the moment in the Bourne Supremacy where Jason Bourne is on a rooftop. He is talking to Pamela Landy. He wants a meeting with Nikki, and Pamela Landy is like, what if I can't find her? And he just says, well, it's easy. She's right next to you. And this actually, thinking about it, echoes back to what we were just talking about with United 93 and also that moment in Captain Phillips, where once he says that line, everything drops. Like the only thing different about this moment is that the score does kind of linger there, and it does kind of have this kind of heft to it. But Greengrass just lets that line just kind of linger around, and he focuses on the facial reactions of everyone in that room going, what the just happened? Like, because they think they're on his heels when in actuality they're 10 steps behind, and he's literally across the street. And as I was talking about on the extra film, it's become one of these iconic moments from the Bourne franchise and from action movies in general in the 2000s. And I think it certainly earns that kind of prestige. I think it's a wonderful moment that certainly stands out in this movie. And it's just so Jason Bourne. And again, that fun factor that you have in the Bourne movies, it's because of moments like this.
And a lot of credit has to go to Tony Gilroy and his script in creating that moment too. Unless I mean, it may have some of those moments like that may have been in Robert Ludlum's original novels. So Gilroy may have had something like that to springboard off of. I haven't read the book, so I'm not sure. But Tony Gilroy does have to be credited for that moment as well. And there's even another great moment that we mentioned in Bourne Ultimatum, where he's in Noah Vosen's office and says, if we were having this conversation, we'd be having it face to face, and then just hangs up the phone. It is absolutely brilliant. And those surprise moments like that, I think, are what really not only make the Bourne franchise so exciting and entertaining, but really help define the Bourne character as well, and how much he's always so many steps ahead of anyone in this franchise, which was also kind of a disappointment with the movie Jason Bourne, because I can't remember if there was a moment like that in the film. I mean, there kind of was at the end, but it felt a bit tacked on for me personally, even though I think on paper it does work in its own way, JD. But that kind of moment like that and the dramatic urgency that creates was kind of lacking in Jason Bourne, but we can't deny in Supremacy and Ultimatum, it is awesome.
See, absolutely awesome. I kind of agree with you. It's sort of tacked on, but for me, perhaps it's because of how they built it up in the original trilogy. That is the moment I was expecting in Jason Bourne. For that character to feel like that character, that's the one moment we get as far as them revealing that. And I loved it for that reason. It's very smart. It's one of the few times they were smart in that movie and where I feel like it worked.
And I think it more just has to do with the Alicia Vikander's character and just how I was still so confused about what she wanted to do in this movie. And I think maybe I was just distracted, but but I agree with you. The moment itself is It's cool. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For my number 2 pick, though, I'm keeping it Bourne. I'm absolutely keeping it Bourne, and I'll keep it kind of brief because I talked about this sequence a lot on Extra Film, but I'm going to the Bourne Ultimatum, and I'm talking about the entire chase sequence in Tangier in Morocco between Jason Bourne and the asset of Daesh. First off, the rooftop chase, it does a very good job maintaining that sense of urgency, but also taking time to pause. And it's also very authentic too. And I was reading up on the trivia that there were way too many people in Morocco during the sequence. They couldn't clear the streets. So those moments where they're walking through crowds, those are really the people that live there. They couldn't clear the streets for it. So it is actually like literally authentic in that regard. And then it leads to what I think is one of the best fistfights I've seen in an action film, at least of late. Because, as we know, Paul Greengrass likes to utilize the shaky cam, especially when it comes to his fistfights. And I do think the fistfight in Bourne Supremacy is not done very well, as we talked about on Extra Film, JD. But the one in Bourne Ultimatum between Bourne and Daesh is when Paul Greengrass finally gets it right, and I think is one of the best examples of how you utilize shaky cam the right way, because you can still tell everything that is going on. You could see it all. You could feel the chaotic nature of it, that it almost feels like it puts you in the middle of their fist fight. I mean, I can almost imagine watching this film in the theater again and almost putting up my hands like I think I'm about to block someone's punch. It's like, it almost feels like I am there, and it is so good at utilizing that shaky cam technique in the right way, and it is very well choreographed, very well edited, very surprising in the weaponry that is used. As usual, Jason Bourne fights Daesh with a book in one scene. It is awesome, and I love it for all those reasons. I'll just leave it at that because it is so well put together, and I think that is another great example of what makes Paul Greengrass so good, is when he utilizes this technique in the right way and becomes a great example of how to do it well. So that's why this chase and this fight is my number 2.
Brendan, I'm glad you're finally thinking with your head straight there.
I'm finally going with Bourne punching someone.
Yes, yeah. Good pick.
I'm glad I got your approval, man. Good stuff there. But let's get to our nitty-gritties, because I'm sure we have a lot more Jason Bourne punching to talk about. So, Mike,
at least one more.
Yeah, at least one more, yeah. What is your number 1 pick, Mike?
This one is on my list purely for, I think I could do this. This is the rare time where I think I could be Jason Bourne. Okay. Because he's wounded, he's on the run, and he goes to what every man will go to when you think you're on your last rope, and he finds a bottle of alcohol, vodka in this case, which wouldn't be my drink of choice in my final moments before Carl Urban comes to kill me. Yeah. But and yeah, Bourne Supremacy, he grabs it, and of course I was assuming, it being a Bourne film, that he's gonna use it to shatter over his head or something. But no, he takes a swig, and I'm like, all right, cool. Bourne, he's evolved. He's gone from violence to alcoholism. And this might be like, if you were doing a top list of moments in film of all time, I probably would have this on there, because I was probably the only one in my theater that was riveted by Jason Bourne drinking alcohol. And of course he uses it, but he spits in the cop's face, which is crude. But yet again, it's Bourne always having some idea of what he's going to do. But I like to kind of in the back of my mind think that he didn't really know he was going to use it as a weapon, and he really was just like, all right, it's been a good one. It's been an interesting life, and took a drink. But yeah, I mean, yet again, that this one a little bit more of a comical moment, but I think that's something that Greengrass does with the series. Is this could, like, the original trilogy really could be very lectury. Like, it could be like, the action film for like smart guys. And I do think there are elements in this where he embraces the silliness of the action genre, especially like the lone wolf, the guy on the run. And in this instance, it ends up taking a swig of vodka and spitting it in a cop's face to make your escape. So that is my number 1 on my extremely art house list of Jason Bourne fighting people. But I may surprise y'all with an honorable mention, because I actually picked something that was not a Jason Bourne film.
Oh, wow.
And it would actually, if I'm being serious, it would probably be my favorite moment in a Paul Greengrass film. So I'll get to that in an honorable mention.
All right, sounds good. But yeah, you can't talk about that scene without talking about Jason Bourne spitting the spitting in the cop's face, and I think the main reason why is because when I first saw this film, I was kind of like you, Mike. I was thinking, okay, he's going to either use it as some kind of weapon, or he's going to maybe use it for his wound in some way too, which it makes a lot of sense. I did not expect to see him spit in the cop's face like that, and it comes out of nowhere. It is so quickly edited, but I think it adds to what you're talking about. It's not only is it smart and makes sense for what Bourne would do in that situation, but it's amusing. It's kind of amusing, and I think it does a good job maintaining this entertainment factor of this Bourne saga without becoming too self-important with itself, because as we talked about, the trilogy does have a lot of important things to say about post 9/11 and national security, and it does those very well, but it doesn't forget these movies are also fun action films, and moments like that help maintain that balance in a very good way. So for those reasons, I think it is a very good pick for this list, and honestly one that I can probably consider an honorable mention for me now. It's a very good moment. Good stuff there, man. I agree with you.
Look at you, Mike, going with the character choice. The character choice in the action movie.
And influencing us in the end, because I'm now thinking, maybe I should have had that too, because it actually makes a lot of sense.
Good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, JD? What is your number one?
Okay, so anyone that listens to our show will probably roll their eyes when I tell them that I am an emotional guy. It's just who I am. I can't help myself.
I had no idea.
What I love about film.
I've always thought you were kind of a cold, distant character.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people seem to think that, but so as I have kind of demonstrated on 2 different occasions this year with my emotions, that's where I'm going with for my number 1. As much as I love the ending to United 93, and I'll get to that in honorable mentions, my number 1 is the final scene of Captain Phillips.
Have a seat. Try my shoe. I'm Chief O'Brien. I'll be your corpsman today, okay? Can you please tell me what's going on? Can you talk? Can you tell me what's going on?
I'm okay.
Are you okay? Because you don't look okay. Are you in any pain right now? Are you in any pain right now? Right there on your side. Okay. Let me see it really quick. Can you lift up your arm a little bit? Does that hurt? A little bit? A little bit. Okay. Is it tender? Go ahead and put your arm down. Okay, I need you to look at me. I need you to calm down. I need you to breathe. There you go. Deep breaths. There you go. Very good. Awesome. Now I want you to relax your arm. Okay, we're going to put this little thing on your finger, and we're going to get your heart rate and your oxygen level. Make sure you're breathing okay.
Okay.
I want you to keep doing that, okay? What happened to your head? Captain, can you tell me what happened to your head? It's okay. Take your time. Take your time.
I think that this is objectively one of the best moments of Tom Hanks's career as an actor. I think the emotion that he depicts in the final 2 or 3 minutes here is immaculate acting. The fact that he didn't get nominated for Best Actor that year is a travesty and just absolutely absurd. The whole journey that Captain Phillips goes on in this film, you're talking about some of that moral ambiguity, Brendan, I completely agree with you, but what he goes on is certainly going to take an emotional toll on him. And when this execute moment happens that you were referencing earlier, and he kind of hears the fallout of that, there's blood everywhere in this little boat, a bunch of it is on him, and the ordeal is over with. He has no idea how to cope with it, has no idea how to react other than to just lose himself in his emotion. And the way Paul Greengrass depicts it, we've been talking about, or at least I have in my list, how he just lets these moments breathe. This is another great example. I feel like I was having the same kind of emotional catharsis that Captain Phillips was having on screen. And when he goes into the boat and he's not exactly sure what to say and they're kind of having to walk him through it, I was a mess. I was literally bawling my eyes out for him, and I don't think it gets any better than that moment for Paul Greengrass. And Henry Jackman's score and his reiteration of the time track by Hans Zimmer is perfect. Absolutely perfect, brilliant use of using someone else's score in this film. I thought it was just incredible filmmaking, and was easily one of my favorite moments of 2013 and probably of this decade so far. It's just incredible. When I look back at 2013, this moment comes to mind for me.
And for all the right reasons, too. And what I think is very interesting about this scene, first off, is Tom Hanks' performance, because the fact he wasn't nominated, like you said, is kind of it's kind of an insult. I don't even want to say it's cruel that he wasn't nominated for that moment. And it's not just the moment of his his cries of pain that he goes through. It's those small moments of shock that he is dealing with, where he has to constantly ask, like, what did you say? I can't he can't even comprehend what the hell's going on, and he emulates that perfectly. Those moments of shock. But what I think is even more astounding here is, because you obviously see that Captain Phillips himself, based on Tom Hanks' performance, is very much he's very much harmed by the situation that he was just in. But at the same time, his moments of catharsis and those moments of cries that he lets out, you can tell that deep down, I think he's feeling some regret for what he did. And that, as far as choosing to put his crew in danger like this, and then I think that that moral ambiguity that we were talking about is surprisingly still maintained because of Tom Hanks' performance. And that is a lot of credit that has to go to Paul Greengrass, because the director has to be the one to direct their actors into emulating that. And he does. Paul Greengrass does that. Does that very well. It took me like 3 times to watch this film to really realize how morally ambiguous that the ending of this film still is, because I felt like it was a bit one-sided when I first saw the film, and then I realized how wrong I actually was. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Another great honorable mention for me, but an easy argument could be made as to why this is one of the best Paul Greengrass moments. It's immaculate. Great stuff.
It is my only honorable mention, and it is my favorite moment in a Paul Greengrass film. It's my favorite moment in Tom Hanks' career. I'll echo everything. He should have been nominated. He should have won that year. What I always really loved about that scene it's kind of meta in a way to me, because I think you ask the audience to go along with Captain Phillips. Like you are talking about, there's that ambiguity as far as, is he making the right decision? And then at a certain point, the decisions are removed from him. Like he's no longer in control. And I think because of the style, because that sort of almost documentary feel that Greengrass brings, that the audience as well as the character needs that catharsis. You need that moment to realize that journey you've been on. And I've heard some criticism of Hanks, his performance, and the fact like, oh, he only had one good scene in that film. To me, that scene doesn't work. That if he is a blubbering mess throughout the film and he's unhinged, that ruins that whole journey that character was on.
Yes.
You have to, it is a gut punch in a way. And it's a reminder to the audience of like, what have you been through? Like what have you watched this entire time? Like now's the point where you have to reflect back on your experience of the film. It's no longer just about survival and like, living second to second. Like he's going to have, hopefully a long life ahead of him, as the audience is. Yeah. And you're going to have those moments in life where you just have to sit with things. And that's in a very brief time, as you talked about, JD, like 2 or 3 minutes. There's like 2 hours of emotion and drama all in that little scene. I love that moment. It's one of the best. It probably was the best scene of that year, and it's one of the best scenes of any film I've ever seen. I love that moment. So yeah, that would truly be my number one. But no Jason Bourne punching. So
Mike going with the emotional pick.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting married, JD.
Yeah, that's true. Things are going to change.
He
for
has
you.
a right to be emotional for once. Yeah,
I love it. Oh, it's good stuff.
And you mentioned gut punch. Anyone who does try and say that this film, that Tom Hanks' performance was not that great until this scene, I would say, I'm going to punch you in the face, because I will Jason Bourne your ass, because that is I hate to use this word, but that is stupid. It really is.
I agree.
I won't punch anybody in the face for it, but I will spit vodka in their face if they say that to me.
I could do that too.
Fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great stuff there. So for my number one, I'm going to one of the honorable mentions that I think that's on your list that you mentioned, JD. But I cannot go with anything else for me personally. And I think one of the best things that Paul Greengrass sometimes does is when he's able to use tension and use almost like this sort of action of a sort, if you will, but use it for dramatic and emotional urgency. And I don't think that is done any better than the taking back of United 93 in the film United 93.
حزناوي خليني اروح هناك اساعدهم مسك منيح راح تنزل الطياره اللهم اكرمنا في جنتك اللهم احشرنا يوم القيامة مع الصالحين الله رب العالمين يا الله اللهم ارزقنا نعيم جنتك يا رب العالمين يا الله.
This is when the passengers on the plane realize that they can outnumber these terrorists that have taken over the plane. They realize that they have a chance to possibly stop this plane from at least hitting their target. They accept the potential circumstances of what this could do to them. It's almost like they are accepting potential death. And coupled with the phone calls that they are making and leaving messages to their loved ones, this is one of the most emotionally powerful moments I have seen in any film of the 2000s. It really, really is. And on top of that, it feels like an action scene. It is so deliberately paced and so ridden with this tension throughout. But I think at the same time, it gets into these beautiful thematic notions about what heroism truly is. And I think it is so beautifully represented in this film. And at the same time, I think for as well balanced as this film is, being a very good procedural film, as we were kind of talking about, JD, getting to know these real people that were on the ground and these other airport and defense stations that were monitoring this entire hijacking situation that involved 4 planes, we still get some time spent with the passengers on United Airlines 93. So it makes the dramatic resonance of this climax that much more well-earned in the long run. It's a very well-balanced film, and kind of surprising from a script standpoint that it was written by Paul Greengrass, who also co-wrote Jason Bourne, which is not very well-balanced at all. So Greengrass has proven himself as a solid writer as well, at least in the realms of the movie that it is serving.
And Bloody Sunday also was well-received by critics, and he wrote that screenplay too.
Which is also a very good film. We haven't talked about it much on this list, but I have watched that film. It is quite excellent. So another one I would recommend, and that's a great point there too, JD. I do think United 93, though, in this climax specifically, is just it's beautiful. It really is beautiful, and I think it is really the reason why this film works as a great tribute to the lives that were lost on September 11th, and also does a good job justifying the means of this movie even being made, because a lot of people question, is it too early? Do we need to see a movie about this? Paul Greengrass gets it right. He absolutely gets it right. Yeah, and for those reasons, I cannot pick anything else as my number 1 pick. The ending of United 93 is brilliant.
Yeah, I completely echo that. I mean, it's a toss-up between the ending of Captain Phillips and the ending of United 93 for me. I love them both equally, but I guess if Jason Bourne put a gun to my head, I would pick Captain Phillips.
You do have Tom Hanks's performance there to help kind of seal that deal, and I can absolutely see that. I mean, there's no central performance like that United 93, but at the same time, the use of very unknown actors who maybe only you see like sporadically in supporting roles here and there, I think adds to the authenticity for it. So it does become a bit of a double-edged sword in that regard.
Yeah, that's not a criticism. I just love that ending of Captain Phillips. It's just really, really powerful. But the ending of United 93, I completely echo everything you're saying. It is quite wonderful, and it's an honorable mention for a good reason. So
yeah, absolutely agree with you. Good stuff there. So speaking of honorable mentions, though, let's get right to it. So do you you have any more honorable mentions, Mike, or any more Jason Bourne scenes of him punching people or spitting vodka? Or
I mean, he does, I guess, punch a window as he flies through the air. I guess he punches it with his face and his whole body, and that would be one. But no, really, I wanted to, and JD stole my thunder. So, I plan to just speak at length about the greatness of that Captain Phillips ending, but we've already done. That's the one that I really want to focus on. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great moments with Bourne punching things, but you know what? I think I'm gonna let that go. Bourne's evolving, so now I have to evolve. So that's it. Put that to bed.
Good stuff. How about you, JD? What honorable mentions do you have?
Well, outside of the ending of United 93, I have the death that occurs at about the 20-minute mark in The Bourne Supremacy. I think is a wonderful action sequence that gives emotional stakes to that movie. I love that. The exposing of Abbott, as I was talking about in The Bourne Supremacy, as well, as a good moment for me. The if you were in your office moment in Bourne Ultimatum that you brought up earlier, Brennan, I love that as well. And the last one I had on here is the execute sequence that we referenced earlier. But thinking about Captain Phillips a little bit more, I'd also have to throw in the "I'm the captain now."
Yeah, had that as well. Mentioned as well. Yeah,
yeah, that's great. Barkhad Abdi is he's incredible. I love him in that movie, and I love that he's starting to get more and more roles in other films. It's great to see that.
That's actually a good point. I use that line all the time with my dog. I'm the captain. I remind him.
It really is going to become a quotable movie quote for the years to come. And I agree with you about Barkhad Abdi, JD, who I'm glad to see him starting to get more work. He was really good in Eye in the Sky earlier this year, and now he's going to be in the Blade Runner sequel.
Yeah, I love
that. So
it's
finally nice to see that. He was just a limo driver and got this role. And
so cool.
Dreams really do come true, I guess. Anyway, as far as honorable mentions for me, a lot of them, that we just talked about are on my list, such as, the face-to-face scene in Bourne Ultimatum, standing right next to you in Supremacy, the Waterloo Station in Bourne Ultimatum, just some of the other ones I have, because Paul Greengrass has been very well at directing car chase sequences. I think the Moscow car chase in Bourne Supremacy is quite excellent. The brief New York car chase in Bourne Ultimatum is great. Even the Vegas car chase at the end of Jason Bourne is very well done, and that is one of the better moments of that scene. The only other one I have is, we didn't talk much about the movie Bloody Sunday, and I'm not sure if you guys even had a chance to see that film, but I did revisit it to prepare for this list. And if I were to have a number 4 pick, it might be the massacre scene from Bloody Sunday, which is there are moments that are almost jaw-dropping that occur in that moment. And it is so visceral and so viscerally felt that you almost think, oh, how did they really just do that? And especially regarding innocent people that arguably didn't even do that just found themselves at the wrong place at the wrong time. It is devastating. It really is. And I think Bloody Sunday is actually one of Paul Greengrass's better films, one of his early films, and one of his better films. So if you haven't seen that one, I do highly recommend it. Regardless, though, there are still a lot of other great moments in all of his films that we could be talking about, even if you want to pick apart a movie like Green Zone, which is kind of forgettable, if you ask me. But I can't even remember if there are any moments in there. But if I were to revisit that film, I'm sure you can find something. So regardless, there are a lot of great moments, and I'm sure those listening, you probably have some other ones that we didn't get a chance to talk about. There are a lot of great stuff from this great director.
Absolutely. So let us know how your picks stack up against ours. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com, or simply leave a comment on Facebook or Twitter, or on our website at InSessionFilm.com.
All right. Before we move on, let's talk about this week's poll.
It's real bad. Okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right. So for this week's poll, more than appropriate to simply just ask, what is your favorite Paul Greengrass film? The options we threw out there were Bloody Sunday, The Bourne Supremacy, United 93, The Bourne Ultimatum, Green Zone, Captain Phillips, and we also had an other write-in option for there, which really, if you don't count Jason Bourne, really only includes his first film, The Theory of Flight, which included Kenneth Branagh and Helena Bonham Carter, which was not really well received anyway, so I doubt that one would have really been taken into major consideration. But if we got some write-in options for it, good for you guys for actually seeing it, because I haven't seen it. But winning the poll at just under 32% is Captain Phillips. I gotta say, I'm not disappointed by this pick, but I'm kind of surprised that our second place option didn't overtake it. That would have been my guess to win this poll if I do say so myself. But speaking of that, in second place at just over 27%, so a very close race regardless, this one was The Bourne Ultimatum, and that's the one I actually thought was going to take the cake. At least me personally, it might be my favorite Paul Greengrass film, either that or United 93, but still great to see it taking the second place spot. And in third place at just under 23% was The Bourne Supremacy. Not surprising to see that one there. So still, the top three here, not surprising overall, and all very excellent films.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not disappointed by these results either. In fact, I almost think, at least for me, the fact that we phrase this favorite Paul Greengrass film is much harder for me compared to if we phrased it best Paul Greengrass film.
Oh, yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, absolutely, because I really struggled to pick between these two Bourne movies and Captain Phillips. I love them all. I said on the show that Supremacy might be my favorite of that trilogy, but who knows, depending on the day, that could change, because I love all three of those movies and I adore Captain Phillips as well. So it's hard for me to really say where my vote would go, but I'm glad that, they were the top three, and that's no surprise there, but cool to see Captain Phillips win though.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to see how the voting may have changed if we worded it by saying, what is your objective pick for best Paul Greengrass film? Because we may have seen more love for something like United 93, which I think objectively may be his best film. And even though it is in my top three as far as favorites as well, my favorite may go to Bourne Ultimatum, which is slightly different and for different reasons. But that's the beauty about subjectivity versus objectivity.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it just really depends on the person and what their tastes are. So
yeah.
On that note though, thanks everybody that voted. We really do appreciate it. But we are now going to switch gears entirely as we continue our French New Wave movie series with the 1959 film Hiroshima, Mon Amour. So stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back. Hey guys, just want to pause here for a quick second to say a huge thank you to everybody that is supporting us. We really can't do this without you, and it does go a long way. And if you want to help support us, one fun way that you can do that is by listening to our InSession Film Podcast bonus content.
Absolutely. Our bonus content is a great way where we basically get a chance to talk about some certain things outside of our main podcasting world, if you will, that we don't really get a chance to fit into those shows, whether it be us talking about musical scores with our friend Mark Herney. Sometimes we'll address certain emails we get, such as Eric Hillis's great email elaborating on the history of Sing Street, or, as we'll be doing this week, we love to do our one session with DJ Valentine called Nerdin' Out with DJ Valentine. And with all the news that has just dropped from Comic-Con in San Diego this past couple weeks, essentially, we've got a lot of great nerd content to really dig into, and he's going to help us for that. And it's going to be a lot of fun talking about that.
Absolutely. And if you want to check out that bonus content, as well as some of the other stuff that we have for you, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com, click on that bonus content tab there in our main menu, and once you open up that page, you'll see all of the fun bonus content that we do have available. They are free to listen to, but we do encourage and appreciate a small donation of 99 cents. If you want to help us out in other ways, just go to InSessionFilm.com/donate, and there you'll see a bunch of information and how you can help us out in a various of other ways. Or you can just like the show on Facebook or Twitter, or you can just simply subscribe on iTunes or Jabbercast. No matter what you do, we truly appreciate everyone's support.
Hi, this is Greg.
This is Chuck.
And this is Dan. And we are Talking in Circles. Because the world needs another podcast, we are here as Geekcast Radio's newest edition.
And as the title says, each week we get lost in conversation about a wide range of topics, including movies, comics, games, art, TV, and even occasionally sports.
We play games and discuss pivotal topics like who would win in a fight, the Kool-Aid Man or Tony the Tiger, and examine the hot-button issues of the world of geekdom. We keep things fresh by taking timeless topics in new directions.
We are simply three friends having a fun time talking about life's most fascinating foibles.
Stay connected with us every Tuesday on iTunes or at geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast, now syndicated on geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 180. Brendan, I have loved the taste of blood since I've tasted yours.
Ugh.
Qui es-tu? Tu me tues. Tu me fais du bien. Comment me serais-je douté que cette ville était faite à la taille de l'amour? Comment me serais-je douté que tu étais fait à la taille de mon corps même? Tu me plais. Quel événement. Tu me plais. Quelle lenteur tout à coup. Quelle douceur. Tu ne peux pas savoir. Tu me tues. Tu me fais du bien.
All right, Hiroshima, Mon Amour is directed by Alain Resnais and stars Emmanuel Riva and Eiji Okada, and that's pretty much it. There are a few other characters that show up, but it's mostly just these two having a conversation. So if you're not familiar with the movie, as I mentioned, it's just those two characters, a French actress who is filming an anti-war film in Hiroshima, and she has an affair with a married Japanese architect played by Eiji Okada, and they share their different perspectives on war. It's just them having a conversation for 90 minutes, and that might sound boring, but I promise you there's a lot more to it than that. So let's go ahead and dive into this film, Brendan. I guess for a little bit of historical context, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan, because maybe you'll know more about this movie than me, but in the little reading I did about it, Hiroshima, Mon Amour is considered pivotal and essential French New Wave from the left bank especially. So, and because of that, we certainly wanted to give this film a go. I had never seen it before. I think you had seen it at least once before. So
yeah,
let's go into it. One, did you get a chance to rewatch it? And if so, what do you think about Hiroshima, Mon Amour?
I did get a chance to rewatch it, as it has been quite a few years since I had seen it. I think I mentioned during one of our prior reviews on our French movie series that I had taken a French New Wave class during some of my days in college. So, and this is one of the films we talked about. But you're right. One of the things I wanted to talk about was that this is now veering over to the left bank as far as French New Wave is concerned. Because when we talked about Breathless and the 400 Blows, that was the right bank, which was more concerned about its experimental filmmaking and, you know, its freedom from a filmmaking angle. It was very more artistic in the long run, whereas the left bank was a bit more, I don't want to say political, but it was a bit more socially driven and almost more influenced by literature. Usually they employed screenwriters that were either some form of literature writers or columnists in some way, which is the case here with Hiroshima, Mon Amour, and Marguerite Duras, I believe was the writer's name here, who was nominated for a screenplay for this film, is also a fun fact as well.
And that's interesting because for foreign language films, it's pretty rare that they get other nominations besides best foreign language picture. Ida a few years ago got best cinematography, and that was really great to see a nomination there for that film as well. So I always find it interesting when these foreign language films get other love besides, the one category.
Which is also ironic because The 400 Blows was also nominated for its script, and neither that film nor this film was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film.
Which is crazy.
It's absolutely crazy because I would have taken it this year. To get straight to the point, I quite love this film. I don't think it's not my favorite film in the French in the films I've seen of French New Wave, whether it's within this movie series or other ones I have seen of this movement. But I do really love this film as a reflection of history, and I think the opening 20 minutes almost work like a documentary in and showcasing the after effects of World War I in Hiroshima. And some of it is pretty devastating. It almost has a bit of a Grave of the Fireflies kind of momentum going behind it, which I kind of liked about it. But what I think is most interesting about this film is that, arguably, of all the films we'll talk about in this series, I think it's the most psychologically driven. I mean, there are times listening to these two people talk, I feel like I'm in the role of the therapist listening to a patient talk to me about their personal turmoils and how they are affected by this specific moment in history, which gives this movie a lot of thematic resonance. It is very much about, using a very tragic moment in history and how that affects other cultures who may have been indirectly involved in it, which I think is very key in showcasing this affair and this relationship between this French woman and this Japanese man, and how this specific moment kind of has a very direct effect on Emmanuelle Riva's character and her repressing of these tragic memories of her own past, and how this tragedy itself kind of forces those to come back into fruition. But at the same time, you've got the Japanese man, played by Eiji Okada, as you're talking about, who at the beginning I feel like is trying to forcefully push these memories away. He is someone that lives in Japan and has more of a direct history and direct relationship to this post-war situation in Hiroshima. But what I think is most interesting is that this film becomes very key in talking about memory and repression of memory because of tragic events, and that is very much depicted in Emmanuelle Riva's backstory. That is kind of heartbreaking. It gets into some of these great notions about cultural open-mindedness and cultural indifference when it depicts her affair with a German soldier who is considered the enemy, and how she is actually punished for that, which is kind of devastating. But I think it is very key in talking about this film. It's a very good film about cultural open-mindedness, especially in post-war time. And on top of that, just like all French New Wave we've seen, it is so beautifully shot. And the way it utilizes its flashback structure is what was kind of pivotal in having this film be a bit, I guess, ahead of its time, like a lot of films in the French New Wave movement, and that was very well done in that regard as well. But yeah, I think it's quite a beautiful film. I think my only criticism, I think, is that sometimes it does lose me a little bit in the final 20 minutes, and I think it does start to overstay its welcome a little bit, but it does lead to a very good climax that I want to talk about a little bit more. So yeah, I really like this film.
Well, we started off this series, Brennan, with Breathless, which I wasn't very high on. The 400 Blows I loved. With Hiroshima, Mon Amour, I'm somewhere in the middle, but mostly on the positive side with this movie. I really dug this film a lot, and I appreciate and really liked the direction and approach to this film. That flashback structure you're talking about, very unique for this time period. And I agree with you, that first 15 minutes in this documentary style of filmmaking, which is interesting because the director was actually hired to make a documentary initially on the effects of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and instead they moved more to a feature-length film. They wrote a script about these two characters and not only talked about the devastation of war, but as you're talking about the conflict between these two cultures and how that impacted them personally in the middle of all of that. And I really dug that about this film. And on top of that, I just find it really interesting that this whole film revolves around Hiroshima, which was a place devastated by war, right? Yet at the core of this movie, at the heart of it, it's about a woman that kind of falls in love with this place despite all of the tragedy around it. So it's interesting that this town, this devastation actually kind of flips its head a little bit and actually becomes something appealing all these years later. And I kind of love that approach to this film. And what you're talking about thematically as it relates to the Emmanuelle Riva's character and how at the heart of her journey in this movie, it is about her coping with death and tragedy. And I've talked on this show a lot how I love this idea of coping and how people will use different tactics as far as trying to deal with the really difficult events of our lives. In World War II, you don't get a whole lot more arduous than that event. Even though she did something considered despicable by her culture, she fell in love with this guy.
Right.
And what happens to him, it doesn't necessarily go the way that she wanted it to go. And as a result, she becomes really devastated. And here's what I find interesting about this story, Brendan, is that it depicts this idea that sometimes you don't cope with the hard events of your lives. Sometimes you simply just go mad. Like there's no other way to cope. It's just that difficult. You just lose your goddamn mind. And the journey of that is really heartbreaking in this movie. And I think the conversation surrounding that is really interesting. And it leads to what the Emmanuel Rivas character calls as her dubious morals. Like she becomes a very different person on the other side. She doesn't really care to have these flirty flings, and she just is all about herself, I'll just say, on the other side of this. But while she has this affair with this other man in Japan, it kind of stirs up all these feelings about this older romance and the pain that came from all of that. And as you were talking about, it becomes a story about memories and love and forgetfulness. And I find all of that, while it does overstay its welcome a little bit, I don't know if I completely felt the chemistry between the two leads here. But overall, I think those ideas certainly resonate, and as a result, I really did enjoy my experience with this movie.
I love in their interactions that while Emmanuel Riva is looking back on those memories, she starts calling the Japanese man that she's seeing, she starts calling the German soldier that she had that love with in her past. She starts referring to them as the same person in many ways, which I thought was really clever in a very good way, how she's trying to pull Eiji Okada's character into this very specifically. And I did, unlike you though, I did feel the chemistry between these two, and I think it mostly comes down to how Eiji Okada's character is watching Emmanuel Riva open up to these memories, and how he almost feels like he is privileged to be the one to have her open up to him. And he even acknowledges that specifically, which I found kind of heartbreaking. But at the same time, I think it allows him to start looking back on his memories in many ways, and how a lot of that may have been kind of repressed in many ways. And you're talking about how she is the one that's essentially going mad as she looks back on these tragic events of her past. There's the other side of that spectrum, as some people try to just simply cast them away. When you realize you can't really do that. And in their relationship, it allows him to start opening up a little bit more as well. And that was what I found very fascinating. Like I said, this is definitely the most psychologically driven of all the films that we have seen so far. And I think it's well earned in that regard, because it pulls everything together about those notions of love and forgetfulness, but in the midst of cultural indifference that I think make it kind of timeless in the long run as well.
Yeah, I kind of want to defend my comments here about the chemistry between the two leads. Now, I don't think it's bad. Don't get me wrong. I think objectively it works for the film thematically so well.
Sure.
I just think in comparison, especially early on, I didn't quite feel it. Now, I love the narration at the beginning, the shots of them in bed and the intimacy depicted there, I thought was fantastic. It just took a little while for me to come on board with their chemistry. It just wasn't there from the get-go, say, versus something like, let's say, Jesse and Celine in the Before trilogy, which is also a film all about conversation. I felt that connection instantaneously in that movie. And this movie, it took a little while, but by the midway point, especially by the time we get to that dinner sequence at the halfway point, I loved it from that point on. I thought it was really great, and there's some really interesting conversation at that dinner sequence, and that's where the Emmanuel Rivas character, she kind of goes into her backstory a lot more, and what that does to the Okada character, I think, is really fascinating as well. I completely agree with you. It kind of opens up what his experiences with the war has been as well, and they talk about early on that he was actually at war during all of it, and his family was actually killed in the atomic bomb. And you're right that it kind of feels like he had cast away all of those feelings about his family until she kind of starts to bring up her past about the war and how that influenced him. And now psychologically, he is kind of all over the place at that point. And yet I find it interesting that he is still kind of in pursuit of her throughout the rest of the film. And I think at that point, it becomes less about romanticism. That's certainly a part of it, but there's intrigue as far as like how this woman is willing to open up and to tell this story to no one else before. At least that's what she says to him. And that really does something in him. And I think that's what's so alluring to him more so than just her beauty.
Yeah, and that is so beautifully realized in that opening conversation that's kind of narrated over top of this documentary-like sequence of post-war Hiroshima, where Emmanuel Riva is simply saying, like, I remember all of this, I know all of this, and he's replying by saying, you don't know all
exactly.
of this. And watching the film the first time I saw it way back when, I realized that's just him way of trying to say she's ignorant due to the cultural barrier between them.
Sure.
But in many ways, I seeing it a second time, I realized that's more himself trying to continually cast
He's
those
pushing it
painful,
away.
constantly, exactly, constantly pushing them away, and that's what made it that much more heartbreaking in the long run. That I think makes this film that much more rewarding. Then,
yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and get to final thoughts and grades. So, any other final thoughts, and what grade would you give Hiroshima? One or more?
Like I said, really the only criticism I have is around the final 20 minutes of this film, it does start to overstay its welcome a little bit. I think there's a bit of I don't want to call it a chase sequence, but there's a bit of a following sequence, if you will, that I think kind of starts to repeat itself a little too much. Sure. And I feel like it's exploring notions that we have already gotten done very well, especially in that dinner scene you're talking about, which is arguably the best scene in the movie.
I agree.
And I do think it starts to become a bit repetitive by that point, but it does lead to a climax in the last exchange in this film where, without giving too much into spoilers, they simply call each other by the names of the cities that they are from.
Yep.
And it perfectly realizes that these types of memories cannot be repressed. Where you come from and what is represented of what happened there will always stay with you. And the only thing you can do is embrace it and learn how to deal with it in the right way. And that is kind of profound. And I thought that was very well done in that regard. And it, that second viewing really enhanced that for me personally. Last thing I'll say is, I think this film is one of the best opening shots I've ever seen in a movie. Watching these two basically intimate with each other. They're basically having sex with each other, but it opens up with what looks like ashes floating on top of them. And then it slowly transitions into sweat and dampness from this beautifully intimate situation that they're finding themselves in. So I love that transition. It creates a great juxtaposition as well. I really do like this film. Not my favorite French New Wave film that I've seen, but enough for me to give it an A. I really did enjoy it.
Yeah, man, I'm completely with you. I really dug this film as well. I would echo everything you said about that opening shot. It is quite something. I think that whole first 15 minutes or so, it has a ton of powerful imagery behind it. Not just that opening shot, but as it kind of flashbacks to the war and how this bomb devastated the people of Hiroshima. There's some really powerful imagery there, and the editing in that sequence is quite stellar. I love how they kept going back to those shots with them being intimate, but at the same time kind of playing into the history and the context of Hiroshima and what we're about to get into with these two characters. Love that.
If I may interrupt quickly, if you really like the first 15 minutes of this film, I highly recommend Alain Resnais' documentary Night and Fog, which you may have heard of. It's instead of Hiroshima, it's about the Holocaust, and it does. It's only like 30-some minutes long, and it's hardly a documentary. It's more of a reflection of the event. But what he does in that documentary is very much similar to what he does in the first 15 minutes of this film, and it is quite beautiful. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out because I really dug the first 20 minutes of this movie. Getting back to that ending sequence that you're talking about, I completely agree with everything you're saying. I love how there's these callbacks to the places that they're originally from, and it's very representative of who they are in a lot of ways. And it starts early on in the film where the Okada character, he basically asks the Emmanuel Rivas character to tell him a story about where she's from because he's very infatuated with this little town in France that she is from, which eventually leads to a grander story that he probably didn't expect. But it kind of centers around this notion that there's one moment in your past that has a huge ripple effect on who you become later on in life. And in this film, a lot of that is not only centered around culture and where you're from physically and geographically, but also emotionally, and how that leads to this, I guess, conflict, or this, or at least really fascinating conversation between the two, I think is pretty riveting stuff. So even though it is mostly just a conversation, there's a lot of thematic material here that I do think is really rich and just as relevant to our lives today. When I look back at my life, I can certainly think of one moment in my past that has a huge ripple effect to who I am today. Whether that relates back to where I'm from or not, that's perhaps a different story. But I do think that, you know, the ideas brought up in this movie are quite stellar. And I think in execution, as I said earlier, I think are objectively really great. Subjectively, I think there are a few things that I can nitpick at that keep me from loving this film, like the 400 blows. But I do think this is a really great film for the French New Wave. So far we are 2 for 3, Brendan.
Oh, that's good to hear, man. But we got 2 more to go, and we don't know what's going to happen there, because one of the final film we'll be talking about, voted by our listeners, is another one by Jean-Luc Godard, and we know how that went for you.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. As far as a grade for this film, objectively, I'd go as far as saying A. Subjectively, probably around a B+ or A-, somewhere in that range. Still highly recommended, though, either way. So. And we will have a review on this film, as well as the 2 previous films on our French New Wave that you can catch soon at InSessionFilm.com.
And if you have seen Hiroshima Mon Amour and you agree or disagree with what we had to say about it, come join in on our French New Wave conversation. Leave us a comment on our Facebook page, our Twitter page, or email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. Before we get out of here, Mr. Michael Denniston, thanks so much for joining us this week, man. It was a huge pleasure to finally get you back on the show.
Yeah, it's been too long, and even though I'm going down to 5 episodes a day, hopefully you and Brendan can join me. We'll plan ahead and we'll do it. I've got to record before I get out of town, so hopefully we can do something for the September episodes that will be recorded in August. So I'd love to do it.
You promised me a midnight special episode, which that film is now on Blu-ray, and I am dying to discuss that film with you, as well as About Time. So you need to make sure that you get me back on to talk about that.
Let me look and see what father son or maybe some parenting movies about special powers. If we can find one other one, a new one to tie it to, we'll just go ahead and record that bad boy. I would actually really like to talk about Midnight Special. It's one that I was not extremely high on, but it's one I love to talk about. I think that it's a really interesting film.
Well, hopefully I could sway you, because it's my favorite film of the year, and it's not even close.
That is a tall order. I look forward to that conversation. And Brendan, you can come on. We'll have a more casual, agreeable chat than that.
Sounds good. Look forward to that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Fair enough. All right. Well, tell us about War Machine versus Warhorse real fast, and where can we find you on the internet?
You can listen to the show on followingfilms.com. It's on there with some other podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. The basic premise, as kind of JD just alluded to there, is we take a new release and we pick out a theme. It could be a filmmaker, Woody Allen has a new film. We could look back at some of his filmography. We did that recently for Brian De Palma.
Sure.
Or it could be plot specific. Could be an actor's performance for Captain Fantastic. We've got that'll be the episode coming up this week, and we're looking at films where Viggo Mortensen has gone off the grid in some ways. So we're going to be talking about a history of violence and the road.
Yeah.
So that's the basic setup. So if you haven't seen the new film, we don't try to spoil anything, but we try to give you a hint about 2 other films in a person's back catalog that you may want to check out that share some sort of sensibilities. So that's a setup. It's a very taxing show to produce. Hopefully it's not a taxing show to listen to, although at times I would agree with listeners that it probably is. So that's the magic of editing.
No, it's a great show, and I love both The Road and A History of Violence, and I'm so looking forward to Captain Fantastic that I might have seen by the time this episode goes live. So I'll be very, very curious to check out that particular episode. But yeah, it's a great show. Thanks again, Mike, for joining us, and highly recommend his show if you haven't heard it. And on that note, that will do it for this week's show. Again, just a friendly reminder that you can follow us on social media. Just search InSession Film and you'll find us on all of the various networks. we do respond to every piece of email as well. So email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And for more thoughts on all the films that we watch, we're pretty active on Letterboxd, so go and check us out there at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm.
Also, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Jabbercast. But while you're on iTunes, please leave us a review there. We'd appreciate some feedback there as well. You can also find us on Google Play Music, which you can find a link for straight from our website at InSessionFilm.com. Our podcasts are syndicated every single week at GeekCastRadio.com and the Lamb Podcast Network. And you can also check out our Listen Now page straight from our website at InSessionFilm.com/listen-now.
And the InSession Film Podcast is supported by our super awesome listeners like you. Once again, if you want to help us, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com. You can click on that bonus content tab on the main menu to hear our fun bonus content for just a small donation of 99 cents. You can check out the InSession Film store or simply go to InSessionFilm.com/donate. And there you'll see a bunch of information and how you can help us. And one thing that I would highly recommend is checking out our mobile app, where you can hear everything we do under one roof for just a one-time fee of $1.99. You can find that app on the Amazon Market for Android devices, the Windows 8 phone store for Windows devices, and the Podcast Box app for iOS devices. And again, all those details are on the site at InSessionFilm.com/apps. Brendan, what do we have next week on the show, good sir?
What is that? We're talking about another superhero film? Sorry, it's The Voices. I'm kidding.
Wow.
That was a terrible way to introduce that. Oh my gosh. Don't hate me for that, folks. I tried my best.
That was
the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that we've got yet another superhero film, or kind of a superhero film, if you want to argue that, in Suicide Squad, which we're finally talking about, comes out very soon, and I'm really looking forward to this one. Being another superhero film, though, I'm kind of curious if you'll even see it, Mike. But
I've been threatened. I've called the bench in for Pop Culture Case Study, which I usually do the new release episodes on, and I've told Dave to bring it back up off the bench and give me the week off. But I don't know. Actually, all that being said, that is my kind of persona. I mean, everything I've seen, it looks like a film I would like. Except for the fact that it's just yet another superhero movie. But I don't know. We'll see. I love, I'm one that really liked that Schwarzenegger film that Ayer did, which is like complete like trash. But I love him doing, I guess men, in this case women, on a mission as well. So I think it could be fun. We'll see.
Yeah, and something tells me it's not going to really aesthetically feel like a superhero film. And we've known that. It's been confirmed that Batman's going to be in the film in some way, maybe for a small part, but I think calling it a superhero film is really more genre-based or category-based than actual aesthetics. So
exactly.
And hopefully it gets pretty well received. I haven't really heard anything about it other than just some early Twitter responses from test screenings and stuff. But hopefully it's pretty good, because I'm really looking forward to this one. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. The last two David Ayer films I've seen have ended up in my top 5 for their particular year. So I can't wait to see this one. Hopefully it's a good birthday present for me next weekend.
Absolutely.
Before we get out of here, let's go to final thoughts. We'll start with you, Mike. Do you have any final thoughts on anything before we leave today?
Yeah, you can listen to War Machine versus Warhorse, and you will probably have other thoughts afterward, which maybe are not always pleasant. But we look forward to that. So, no, final thoughts. You know what? I talk a lot of junk about superhero movies. Check out the De Palma if you get a chance. I know you've got a lot of active movie fans, and I think if you're someone who listens to movie podcasts, it is really cool to see a documentary where you just see a man sit down and just talk about his filmography, because that's kind of what we all enjoy doing anyway. So to hear it from the horse's mouth, De Palma is something I've been very excited about, enthusiastic this summer. So yeah, there's some positivity there for a final thought.
Okay, very cool. What about you, Brendan?
Only other thing I want to mention, I forgot to mention this, but for next week's show, we're going to be continuing our French New Wave series with Cleo from 5 to 7, which I have not seen yet, and look forward to getting into that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it and haven't seen it as well. As far as final thoughts for me, I feel like a lot of the times I am pretty safe. At least that's the word that's been thrown my way a lot of times. So let me say something controversial here. If you sympathize with the Jason Bourne character in his movies, especially this new one, but you don't sympathize with the Baron Zemo character in Captain America Civil War, you are representative of why our culture is going to hell. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there.
I guess I'm going to hell then, because I
will stick to my guns. If that film, if Civil War is shot from Baron Zemo's perspective, you root for him like you do Jason Bourne in these movies. What happened to him was not okay, and I absolutely sympathize with why he is pissed off. And if people do not sympathize with that emotion, just back away from me, because I don't think we can have a conversation anymore.
Well, I may have to back away a little bit. Okay, well, let me say this. Okay, since we're on this topic now, because I think that comment was directed at me more than anything else.
No. The comment's not directed at anyone in particular. Again, I'm not talking characters. I'm talking emotion. If you do not sympathize with what happened to Baron Zemo and why he is upset, which seems to be the consensus from a lot of people, he is doing nothing different than Jason Bourne, who was also going around killing people and also upset. They are the exact same thing.
Okay. I know the comment wasn't directed at me, because I was like, who's Baron Zemo?
Yeah, I know it wasn't Mike Deniston, yes.
Okay, well, then let me say this. Do I sympathize with the actions of what Zemo is doing in Civil War? Absolutely. Do I sympathize with the character as far as how he's executed in the movie? No, I thought he was dull as a rock, and that was my biggest problem. I think on paper I sympathize with him, but as a character in a movie, I did not. So that's my argument against it. But JD,
that's two different conversations.
Okay, and that's what I wanted to make clear, because the argument you're making, I do agree with. I do agree with the notions of what he's doing, and on paper, I think it is very profound.
Yeah, and that's what I want to make super crystal clear. And I just feel like I have seen those kind of comments, so I feel like I would kind of just bring them
up.
What
is going on here? I end on positivity. He brings out the bats for people. I'm like, we all love movies.
I know.
Now we're talking about the political hypocrisy of our world. This just got real, man.
Anyway, on that note, thanks, Mike, for being here. I'm sure we lost all of our listeners, so we'll see you guys never.
Sorry, guys. I had no part in this, other than that I didn't like the character of Zemo, but that's probably bad enough.
No, I love everybody here. I'll end on that positive note. So, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you guys next time on the InSession Film Podcast. For the entire version of our podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Stitcher, or check us out online at InSessionFilm.com.